1951 Harlem Vincent Moretti dared to humiliate Bumpy Johnson by touching his wife in broad daylight. By dusk, 3 men were dead and 1 returned with a warning. This wasn't petty revenge, it was a calculated strike for respect. Bumpy Johnson stood alone, turning a personal insult into a battle for Harlem. But how did he plan it, and what made Moretti pay the ultimate price? The story rewinds to the moment it all began. Harlem in 1951 was not territory. It was scripture, written in smoke and whispered prayers in the click of Sunday shoes on cracked pavement, in the way old women blessed door frames and young men understood which corners belonged to the living and which belonged to ghosts. The blocks between 110th and 155th Street did not simply exist on maps. They pulsed with their own law, their own order, a code that predated any badge or statute book the city pretended mattered. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, 3 men sat in the back room of the Red Rooster, the kind of place where deals got made over fried chicken and bourbon that never touched a tax stamp. Bumpy Johnson sat with his back to the wall, as he always did, watching the door with eyes that had seen too many men walk through, thinking they were the first to try something clever. Across from him sat Dutch Schultz's nephew, a pale man named Eddie, who sweated through his collar even when the room was cold. "My uncle always said you were reasonable." Eddie began his voice, trying for confidence and landing somewhere closer to pleading. "He said you understood business." Bumpy did not move. He let the silence sit there between them like a third person at the table, heavy and patient. Finally, he spoke, his voice low enough that Eddie had to lean forward to catch every word. "Your uncle also said he was untouchable, right up until the night they found him face down in a plate of spaghetti with 3 slugs in his spine. Reasonable only works when both sides remember what happens when it stops working." Eddie's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. The ice clinked against the sides like teeth chattering. "We are not asking for Harlem. We know better than that. We are just asking for the edges, the places where your people and our people are already doing business. Share the pipeline, split the profit. Nobody needs to bleed over a street corner." "Nobody needs to bleed," Bumpy repeated, and something dark flickered across his face. "You hear that, Junie? This boy thinks bleeding is optional." The third man at the table, one of Bumpy's lieutenants named Junie, set down his glass with deliberate care. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife, all sharp angles and old scars. "Last week, 2 of Moretti's boys tried to collect from one of our numbers runners on 145th. Tried to tell him the percentages were changing, that new management was taking over." Eddie went very still. "I do not know anything about that." "Of course you do not," Junie said, his voice gentle in the way that predators are gentle right before they strike. "You just handle the paperwork. You just make the introductions. You just come in here with your nice suit and your clean hands, and you ask for things like this is a negotiation between gentlemen. But you know what we did to those 2 boys." The question sat there like a loaded gun on the table. "We found them." Junie continued, leaning forward until Eddie could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Found them trying to muscle in on business that was not theirs to touch. So we took them to a place where nobody could hear them scream. And we started with their hands. Not all at once. 1 finger at a time. We used bolt cutters, the kind they used to cut through chain link fences. Each finger took maybe 5 seconds. The screaming took longer." Eddie's face had gone the color of old newspaper. "Jesus Christ!" "Jesus was not there," Bumpy said quietly. "Just us. Just them. Just the understanding that when you reach for something that does not belong to you, sometimes you lose the hand you reached with. They lost more than that before we were finished. We wanted to send them back as a message, but by the time we were done, there was not enough left to send anywhere. So we wrapped what remained in a tarp and dumped it where the river meets the docks. Let the current take it. Let the fish finish what we started." Eddie stood up so fast his chair fell backward, clattering against the floor. "I came here in good faith. I came here to talk." "And we talked." Bumpy said, still seated, still calm, still watching Eddie with eyes that had seen this scene play out 100 times before. "Now you walk out of here and you tell whoever sent you exactly what I am about to say. You tell them that Harlem is not a business opportunity. It is a kingdom built on the backs of men who bled for every inch of it. You tell them that the edges they want to share those edges are guarded by people who will skin them alive for thinking they could just walk in and take. You tell them that the next man who tries what those two boys tried will not get bolt cutters. He will get something slower, something that takes days instead of hours, something that makes him beg us to finish him long before we decide he has learned enough. Eddie was already backing toward the door, his face slick with sweat. You are making a mistake. You cannot fight all of us. Junie laughed a sound like rocks grinding together. We do not have to fight all of you. We just have to make an example out of enough of you that the rest remember why this neighborhood has belonged to Bumpy Johnson for 20 years. You think you are the first crew to try this? You think Moretti is the first ambitious young killer who looked at Harlem and saw easy money. There have been 10 of him, 20. We buried them all. We will bury him too. Eddie's hand was on the doorknob when Bumpy spoke one last time. One more thing. You see that mark on Junie's face, that scar running from his temple down to his jaw. Eddie nodded, unable to speak. That came from a man named Carlo Benedetti. He walked in here in 1947 with the same speech you just gave. Same promises, same percentages, same talk about working together. He left thinking he had made progress. 2 weeks later, he came back with 6 men and tried to take the Red Rooster by force. Shot Junie in the face at point-blank range. The bullet went through his cheek and out the other side missed everything important by half an inch. You know what we did to Carlo. The silence stretched until Eddie could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. We kept him alive for 11 days. Bumpy said, his voice flat and factual. We broke every bone in his hands so he could not fight back. We burned the soles of his feet so he could not run. We cut off his eyelids so he could not look away from what we did next. And when he finally begged us to end it, when he cried and pleaded and promised us anything we wanted, we made him watch while we went after everyone he cared about. His brother, his cousin, the girl he was planning to marry. We made sure he understood that dying was not the punishment. Living long enough to see what his ambition cost everyone else that was the punishment. Eddie fumbled with the door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the knob. When he finally got it open, he stumbled through without looking back. After the door closed, Junie poured himself another drink. You think that one learned anything? Bumpy reached for the bourbon, his hand steady as stone. Does not matter. He will go back and tell Moretti what I said. And Moretti will do what men like him always do. He will ignore the warning because he thinks he is different. He thinks he is smarter. And then we will teach him the same lesson we taught all the others. Could get messy, Junie said. It always gets messy, Bumpy replied. That is the point. You make it messy enough, brutal enough, and eventually people stop testing whether you mean what you say. Fear only works if you are willing to do the things that create it. Words are cheap. Terror is expensive, but it lasts. Across town in a social club that smelled like cigars and marinara sauce, Vincent Moretti was listening to a different kind of report. His man Sal stood in front of him, nervous in the way that men get when they have to deliver news they know will not be well received. Eddie came back shaking, Sal said. Said Bumpy threatened him, told him stories about what they did to our boys last week. Ahi. Moretti lit a cigarette, the flame from his lighter casting shadows across his face. What boys? The 2 we sent to test the waters on 145th, Mickey and Frank. They have not reported in. How long? Moretti asked, his voice dangerously quiet. 5 days. Moretti stood up slowly, the cigarette dangling from his lips. He walked to where Sal stood, and without warning, without any change in expression, he drove his fist into Sal's stomach, hard enough to double him over. Sal collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. 5 days, Moretti said, grinding out the cigarette under his heel. 5 days you knew 2 of our men were missing, and you are just now telling me. 5 days Bumpy Johnson has been walking around thinking he can touch what is mine and there will be no consequences. Sal tried to speak but could only wheeze, his face red and twisted. Get up, Moretti said. And when Sal was slow to respond, he grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet with the casual strength of a man who had spent his whole life hurting people. You go find out what happened to Mickey and Frank. You drag the river if you have to. And when you find out, when you confirm what we already know, you come back here and you tell me exactly how Bumpy Johnson thinks he can kill my men and send some washed-up nephew to deliver threats like I am supposed to be impressed. Another man entered the room, younger than Sal, with the kind of hungry look that suggested he was tired of watching other people make decisions. His name was Paulie, and he had been pushing for action since the first time Moretti mentioned moving into Harlem. We hit them tonight. We hit them hard. We show them what happens when they forget who they are dealing with. No, Moretti said, and the word came out like a blade. We do not rush. Rushing is what gets you killed. We plan. We find every place Bumpy does business. Every policy bank, every numbers runner, every joint where his money flows. And then we do not just hit them. We erase them. We burn their operations to the ground, and we make sure everyone working for him understands that their choice is simple. Work for us or end up in pieces scattered across 3 boroughs. Sal, still catching his breath, managed to speak. He has been doing this for 20 years. He knows every move we might make. Moretti turned on him with a look that could have stripped paint. 20 years! You say that like it is a strength. 20 years means he is old. 20 years means he is slow. 20 years means he has been playing by rules that do not exist anymore. This is not 1931. This is not the old days where you shake hands and agree on territories. This is now. And now belongs to whoever is willing to do what needs to be done without crying about respect and tradition. He walked to the window, looking out at the street below, where people moved through their lives unaware of the violence being planned above them. You want to know what respect is worth? I will tell you. Respect is what you give someone when you are too weak to take what you want. Bumpy Johnson built his kingdom on respect. I am going to show him what happens when someone stops giving it to him. I am going to take Harlem piece by piece, and every time he tries to stop me, I am going to hurt him in ways that make him wish he had just walked away when he still could. Paulie smiled, the expression predatory and eager. Where do we start? We start with his wife, Moretti said, and the room went absolutely silent. Not killing her, not yet, but we make sure she knows we could. We make sure Bumpy understands that nothing he has is untouchable. Not his territory, not his reputation, not the woman sleeping in his bed. We make him choose between defending what he built and protecting what he loves. And when he chooses wrong, when he makes the mistake that men like him always make, we finish him. Sal looked sick. That crosses every line there is. Good, Moretti said. I want him to know that lines do not exist anymore. I want him to understand that the world he built his reputation in is gone. And I want everyone in this city to know that when you stand between me and what I want, you do not just lose. You lose everything. Your business, your people, your family, your life. All of it goes into the dirt, and nobody remembers your name except as a warning about what happens when you forget that power is not about who has been there longest. It is about who is willing to go furthest. The arrangement came down from the commission in October, delivered through intermediaries who spoke in careful language, designed to sound like compromise but structured like a command. Vincent Moretti would control the southern edge of Harlem, a 3-block strip where 110th Street bled into Spanish Harlem, and the boundaries became deliberately vague. On paper, it looked like peacekeeping. In reality, it was a loaded gun pointed at Bumpy Johnson's head, and everyone knew the trigger would get pulled eventually. Moretti took the territory like a man who had just been handed permission to start a war. He moved operations in fast, setting up policy banks and storefronts that had been empty for years, bringing in dealers who worked corners with the aggressive efficiency of an occupying army. The agreement said he would stay south of 110th, but agreements only matter when both sides believe in them, and Moretti had stopped believing in anything except the weight of a pistol and the sound of bone breaking under his knuckles. Within 2 weeks, his men started appearing on 111th Street. Not with guns drawn, not making threats, just lingering in doorways, smoking cigarettes where they had no business standing watching Bumpy's runners, the way wolves watch sheep before they decide which one bleeds first. They would drift north during busy hours, blend into crowds, test how far they could push before someone pushed back. When Bumpy's men confronted them, they would smile, apologize, claim they got lost, always retreating before it became worth shooting over. But the pattern repeated. Every day a little further north. Every night a little longer before they withdrew. They started approaching Bumpy's customers, offering better odds. Lower prices, making it clear the old loyalty meant nothing if you were stupid enough to keep paying more than you had to. They undercut prices by just enough to hurt stealing business that had belonged to Bumpy for 20 years, bleeding his operation one customer at a time. Bumpy watched from the Red Rooster, receiving reports that got worse every night. Junie came in one evening, jaw-tight, fists clenched. They were on 113th today. 3 of them outside Madame Stephanie's, telling her girls the percentages were changing, that she could keep more money if she paid the right people. Bumpy poured bourbon hand steady as stone. What did she tell them? Told them to get off her stoop before she called someone to break their legs. They laughed, took their time leaving, made sure everyone watched them walk away like they owned the street. A younger man named Marcus slammed his fist on the table. So we just let them spit in our faces. We sit here while they steal our business and act like we are too scared to stop them. We let them think we are scared, Bumpy said, voice cold enough to freeze the room. We let Moretti believe we have gone soft. We let him push until he is so far over the line that when we break him, nobody can say we started it. Junie understood immediately. You want him to hang himself. I want him confident, Bumpy said. I want him so certain we are finished that when we move, he will not see it until we are already cutting his throat. Marcus was not satisfied. What if he takes too much before we hit back? Bumpy looked at him with eyes that had seen men buried for asking stupid questions. Then we will have justification to do things that will make people remember why you do not touch what belongs to me. Moretti thinks silence is weakness. That mistake is going to cost him his fingers first, then his teeth, then whatever is left of him after we finish teaching him what happens when you forget where the borders are. Across town, Moretti read reports from his men, each one confirming what he already believed. Bumpy Johnson was done. The old man was watching his empire crumble and doing nothing. 2 weeks of pushing and not a single punch thrown back. He is terrified. Moretti told Polly, smile spreading across his face like a knife wound. 2 weeks and nothing. You know what that means? Means we own him. Means Harlem is ours. We keep pushing, keep taking, and when he finally tries to stop us, we will be so deep in his territory that stopping us means burning half the neighborhood just to reach us. And if he does that, the commission will put him in the ground themselves for breaking the peace. Polly lit a cigarette, eyes bright with the kind of hunger that comes before violence. When do we stop pretending this is about business? Moretti crushed out his own cigarette like he was grinding bone into powder. Soon. Real soon. We have been polite long enough. Next week we stop asking permission. We stop retreating when his boys show up. We make it clear that 110th Street does not exist anymore. And if anyone tries to enforce it, we show them what happens when you stand between us and what we want. They will fight back eventually. Let them, Moretti said, pouring whiskey with the casual confidence of a man who had never lost a war. Let them come at us angry and stupid. Let them break the peace first. Because once that happens, once they throw the first real punch, I am going to take everything Bumpy Johnson has, and I am going to make him watch while I burn it. His business, his reputation, his people. All of it goes into the dirt. And when he is kneeling in the ashes, begging me to finish it, I am going to remind him that this could have been easy. He could have stepped aside. He could have taken a percentage and retired like a smart man. But he chose pride. And pride gets you tortured in a basement until you forget you ever had a name. What Moretti did not understand, what he could not see because he had spent his whole life mistaking patience for fear, was that every step he took into Harlem was another nail being driven into a coffin that Bumpy Johnson was building specifically for him. The silence was not surrender. It was the sound of a trap being set carefully and precisely by a man who had buried better killers than Vincent Moretti would ever be. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in November, the kind of bright cold day when the sun made everything sharp and clear and there was nowhere to hide what you were doing. Lenox Avenue was thick with women carrying groceries home from the market, men standing outside barbershops arguing about the Yankees' children running between parked cars, playing games that had been passed down through generations. The street hummed with the ordinary rhythm of Harlem at midday, everyone moving through their lives unaware that they were about to witness the moment when peace ended and war became inevitable. Bumpy Johnson walked with his wife Mayme on his arm, the two of them moving slowly through the crowd, the way couples do when they have been together long enough that rushing seems pointless. Mayme wore a blue dress that caught the light, her hand resting gently in the crook of Bumpy's elbow, and people nodded as they passed, not because they were afraid, but because respect in Harlem was something you gave freely to the people who had earned it. They were headed to the Apollo, planning to catch an early show, just another afternoon in a life that had somehow survived 20 years in a business where most men did not make it past 5. Vincent Moretti stepped out from between two parked cars directly into their path. He was not alone. Paulie flanked him on the left, and two other men Bumpy did not recognize stood on the right, all of them positioned in a way that blocked the sidewalk and forced everyone around them to choose between stopping or walking into the street. The crowd slowed, then stopped, sensing something wrong in the air, the way animals sense an earthquake before it hits. "Bumpy Johnson!" Moretti said, his voice loud enough to carry loud enough to make sure everyone within 50 feet could hear every word. "I have been trying to reach you for weeks, trying to have a conversation like civilized men, but you have been avoiding me, hiding behind your people, acting like you are too important to take a meeting." Bumpy's face did not change. He stood there, Mayme still on his arm, and looked at Moretti with the kind of patience that suggested he had seen this scene play out before and knew exactly how it ended. "You are blocking my path. Move! Move!" Moretti repeated, smiling at his men like Bumpy had just told the funniest joke in the world. "You hear that? He wants me to move, like he is still somebody who gives orders that matter. Like this is still his neighborhood and not a place that is about to change management." The crowd had grown now, people stopping to watch, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just stood there, frozen, understanding that whatever happened next would become the story they told for years, the moment when the balance of power in Harlem either held or shattered completely. Bumpy's jaw tightened, the only sign that he had registered the insult. Last chance. Move or get moved. Moretti took a step closer, invading the space between them with the deliberate aggression of a man who had decided that consequences were something that happened to other people. "You do not give me chances, old man. You do not give me orders. You do not even own the ground you are standing on anymore. You just have not figured that out yet because you are too busy living in the past, remembering when you mattered." He reached out then, and what happened next took less than 3 seconds, but would echo through every family in New York for the next 20 years. Moretti put his hand on Mayme Johnson's shoulder, his fingers touching the fabric of her blue dress, and he leaned in close enough that Bumpy could smell the whiskey on his breath. "This is a nice woman you got here," Moretti said, his voice dropping to something that might have been a whisper if it had not carried such naked threat. "Be a shame if something happened to her because her husband was too stubborn to understand when his time was finished." The street went absolutely silent. No cars, no voices, no movement. Harlem held its breath and waited to see if the world would end right there on Lenox Avenue in broad daylight. Bumpy did not pull away. He did not shout or curse or reach for the pistol everyone knew he carried. He just stood there, his hand still holding Mayme's arm, his eyes locked on Moretti with a look that had no emotion in it at all, just cold, empty calculation. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that only the men standing closest could hear him. "Take your hand off my wife." Moretti smiled wider, squeezing Mayme's shoulder once before letting go, making sure everyone saw the gesture, making sure they understood that he had touched what was supposed to be untouchable and nothing had happened to stop him. "There! See how easy that was? No drama, no fighting, just a simple conversation between men who understand how the world works." He stepped back, gesturing for his men to follow, and they walked away, laughing, their voices carrying back down Lenox Avenue like the sound of glass breaking in an empty church. Bumpy did not move. Mayme looked up at him, her face pale but composed, and she opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head once, a tiny movement that stopped whatever she was going to say. Around them, the crowd began to disperse slowly, people moving away with the careful deliberation of witnesses who understood they had just seen something they could never unsee. Junie appeared from somewhere in the crowd, his scarred face twisted with rage. "We end him tonight. We find him and we cut him into pieces small enough to mail to his mother." Bumpy turned and started walking. Mayme still on his arm, his pace unchanged from before Moretti had stepped into his path. "No, not tonight." He put his hands on Mayme, in front of the whole neighborhood. "You let that stand, and we are finished." Bumpy stopped walking and turned to face Junie with eyes that looked like they had been carved from stone. "I said not tonight. We do this right. We do this so completely that nobody ever forgets what happens when you cross the line he just crossed. You think I am going to give him a quick end because I am angry. You think I survived 20 years by acting on emotion instead of strategy." "Then when?" Junie asked, and his voice was shaking with the effort of keeping himself under control. "Soon," Bumpy said, and he started walking again, his hand steady on Mayme's arm, his face showing nothing at all. "Real soon. But first I'm going to make sure that when Vincent Moretti dies, it is not quick, it is not clean, and it is not something anyone in this city will ever be able to forget." The story spread through New York like a plague looking for fresh corpses. By nightfall, every family from the Bronx to Brooklyn knew what Vincent Moretti had done on Lenox Avenue. The phone lines burned with whispered conversations, men calling their counterparts in other crews, everyone asking the same question: what is Bumpy going to do? Because everyone who had survived more than 5 years in this business knew that when you put your hands on a man's wife in front of his whole neighborhood, you were not just starting a fight. You were signing your own execution warrant. Frank Costello heard about it during dinner at his usual table in Little Italy, the messenger leaning in close to whisper the details while Costello cut into his veal. He set down his knife, the blade catching light like something meant for surgery, and sat there in silence for almost a full minute. Moretti touched Bumpy's wife. In public. In Harlem. The messenger knotted his throat, working like he was trying not to vomit. "Then Moretti is already dead," Costello said, picking up his knife again. "He just does not know it yet. You tell anyone who asks that when they find what is left of him scattered across 3 boroughs, I do not want to hear one word about retaliation. Moretti bought what is coming. He paid for it the second his fingers touched that woman's shoulder. In the Gambino stronghold, Carlo Gambino listened to the same story while cleaning a pistol that had not been fired in years. When his lieutenant finished talking, Gambino set the gun down and lit a cigar, the flame illuminating his face like something carved from stone. Moretti thinks he won something today. He thinks because Bumpy did not put a bullet through his skull right there on the street, it means Bumpy went soft. This is the kind of mistake that gets men found in car trunks with their tongues cut out and their fingers mailed to their mothers. Bumpy Johnson does not get mad. He gets surgical. But Vincent Moretti heard none of this. He sat in his social club surrounded by his crew drinking whiskey that cost more than most men made in a month, accepting congratulations like he had just won a war instead of lighting the fuse on a bomb meant for his own face. Paulie raised his glass already drunk enough that his grin looked more like a skull, trying to remember how smiling worked. "You should have seen him standing there like a statue while the whole neighborhood watched him do nothing," Paulie said. "That is what defeat looks like. That is what happens when an old man realizes his time is finished." Moretti drained his glass, feeling bulletproof in the way men do right before they learn that bullets are the least of their problems. "Tomorrow we push deeper. We take 115th Street. We take 116th. We make it clear that Bumpy Johnson does not run Harlem anymore. And if he wants to try stopping us, we will bury him next to all the other relics who could not figure out when to quit." What Moretti did not see was that the world around him had already started dismantling itself. The suppliers who fed his operation started missing deliveries, trucks breaking down in convenient places, shipments getting seized by cops who seemed to know exactly when and where to look. The dealers who sold his products started disappearing, not with bodies left as warnings, but quietly vanishing into the night like they had been erased one at a time. His pipeline to the docks went dry when the longshoremen who loaded his trucks decided they had urgent union business. His safe houses, the apartments where he stashed cash and weapons, started getting raided by police who walked in with search warrants and walked out with everything that mattered. Sal brought the first real reports 3 days after Lenox Avenue, his face carrying the kind of fear that comes when a man realizes he is standing on ground that has already started collapsing. We lost the Newark shipment, 50 kilos of heroin, and enough guns to start a war. The truck never showed. Moretti waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. So we lost one shipment. We have backups. We do not have backups anymore, Sal said, his voice cracking like thin ice. Every connection we had last week is not answering calls. Every supplier is suddenly unable to do business. Bumpy is moving. He is doing it so quiet that by the time we figure out how to stop it, there will be nothing left but empty rooms. Moretti grabbed Sal by the throat and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. You are telling me that in 3 days, our entire operation is falling apart, and you want me to just accept it? Sal's face turned purple, his hands clawing at Moretti's wrist. He is strangling us. He is cutting off every supply line, every connection. And he is doing it so carefully, we cannot even figure out where to hit back. Moretti released him, and Sal collapsed gasping. Then we make it loud. We firebomb his clubs. We drag his dealers into alleys and break their kneecaps with tire irons until they understand that working for Bumpy Johnson comes with a price. We find everyone he loves and we make them hurt in ways that force him to come at us direct. Paulie spoke from his corner, sobering up fast. You want to start burning Harlem. You want to go to war in the middle of his territory where everyone knows his face and nobody knows ours. We hit first. We hit hard, Moretti said, pouring another drink with hands that were starting to shake. We make it so brutal that he has to respond, and when he does, we put him down. But even as he said it, Vincent Moretti felt something cold wrapping around his chest. The feeling you get when you realize you have been playing chess against someone who was actually playing a different game, entirely one where all your pieces were already captured and you just had not noticed yet. In Harlem, Bumpy Johnson sat in the back room of the Red Rooster listening to Junie's latest report. Every supplier cut off. Every connection severed. Every piece of Moretti's empire being dismantled with surgical precision. He still does not understand, Junie said. He thinks this is about territory. He thinks if he burns enough buildings, we will back down. Bumpy sipped his bourbon, his hand steady as stone. Let him think that. Every move he makes ties the noose tighter. When we finally take him apart piece by piece, nobody is going to question whether he deserved it. Bumpy Johnson could have killed Vincent Moretti a dozen different ways. Could have had him dragged into a basement and tortured with pliers and blowtorches until he begged for a bullet that would not come for days. Could have put him in a car trunk and driven him to the river where the currents would carry pieces of him to 3 different states. Could have made it theatrical, left his corpse hanging from a streetlight as a warning that would make the front page of every newspaper in New York. But Bumpy chose something worse than dying. He chose to make Moretti watch everything he had built turn to ash while he was still breathing, still conscious, still aware of exactly how completely he had been broken. Because a corpse only suffers once. A man stripped of his power, his reputation, his future. That man suffers every morning he wakes up and remembers what he used to be. The first real blow came when Moretti tried to arrange a sit-down with the Genovese family to discuss expansion into shared territories. The meeting was scheduled, confirmed set for a Wednesday afternoon at a restaurant in Little Italy where these things had been handled for 30 years. Moretti showed up with Paulie and Sal wearing his best suit, carrying proposals and percentages, and all the language of men who still believed they had something worth negotiating. They waited for 2 hours. No one came. No one called. When Moretti finally cornered a waiter and demanded to know what happened, the man looked at him with the kind of pity you save for stray dogs moments before you put them down. Mr. Genovese sends his regrets. He has other business to attend to. Permanent business. The meaning was clear enough to crack teeth. Moretti had been erased from the calendar like he had never existed in the first place. They are shutting me out. Moretti said that night, pacing his club while his remaining crew watched him unravel. The families are pretending I do not exist. Sal, who had stopped pretending this was fixable, poured himself a drink with the resigned efficiency of a man preparing for his own funeral. They know what you did on Lenox Avenue. They know you put your hands on Bumpy's wife, and they know that makes you radioactive. Nobody wants to stand next to you when Bumpy finally decides to finish what you started. I have connections, Moretti shouted, his voice climbing into registers that suggested panic was replacing confidence. I have deals in place. I have people who owe me favors. Had, Sal corrected quietly. You had all those things. Now you have enemies and silence. You are being erased, Vincent. Not killed. Erased. Across town, Carlo Gambino made it official during a meeting with his captains, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that had already been made. Vincent Moretti is on his own. Anyone who does business with him does so without our protection, without our blessing, and without any expectation that we will remember their names fondly when this is finished. Bumpy Johnson has made his position clear without saying a word. Moretti crossed a line that does not exist on any map, but everyone in this room knows exactly where it is. He touched the man's wife. In public. In Harlem. That is not business. That is suicide with extra steps. One of the younger captains, ambitious but not smart, raised his hand. So we just let Bumpy do whatever he wants. We give him permission to take out a made man without consequences. Gambino looked at him with the kind of patience that suggested he was deciding whether the question deserved an answer or a bullet. We are not giving him permission. We are acknowledging reality. Moretti made himself untouchable the moment he decided that respect and tradition were negotiable. What happens to him now is not our concern. It is a lesson. You can break a lot of rules in this life. You can steal. You can lie. You can kill when business requires it. But you do not put your hands on another man's family. Because when you do that, you are not starting a war. You are begging for an execution. In Harlem, the message spread without anyone having to say it out loud. Bumpy had not fired a shot, had not made a threat, had not even mentioned Moretti's name in any conversation that mattered. But everyone understood what was happening. The suppliers who used to feed Moretti's operation were now working exclusively with Bumpy's people. The dealers who had been flipping to Moretti's side were suddenly back in line, telling anyone who asked that loyalty was worth more than a temporary pay increase. The police, who had been conveniently unavailable when Bumpy needed them to look the other way, were now raiding Moretti's locations with enthusiasm that suggested someone was feeding them very detailed information. Every safe house got hit. Every stash got confiscated. Every operation that Moretti had built over the last 5 years was being systematically dismantled. Junie came to Bumpy with the final report on a cold November evening. Moretti has nothing left. His suppliers are gone. His dealers are gone. The families will not take his calls. The cops are so far up his operation they could tell you what he had for breakfast. He is finished. Bumpy sat in his usual chair, bourbon untouched on the table, and allowed himself the smallest smile. Good. Now he knows what it feels like. Now he understands that power is not about who shouts the loudest or who acts the toughest. It is about who controls the board. And I just took every piece he had without letting him see my hands move. What happens now? Junie asked. Bumpy finally reached for his drink, raising it slightly in a toast to a war that had already been won. Now we wait. We let him sit in his empty club with his empty pockets and his empty future. We let him understand that touching Mayme Johnson did not start a fight. It ended his life, not all at once, not with mercy, slowly, carefully, until there is nothing left but the memory of what he used to be and the certainty that he will never be that again. In Harlem, nobody needed to be told what had happened. They saw it in the way Bumpy walked the streets without looking over his shoulder. They saw it in the way his people moved with renewed confidence. They understood without anyone saying it out loud that honor had been defended, that boundaries had been reinforced, and that Vincent Moretti had learned the most expensive lesson a man can learn in this business. Some lines you do not cross, not because you cannot, but because crossing them means you stop existing in every way that matters. Vincent Moretti disappeared sometime in early December. Nobody could say exactly when or how or whether he left New York in a car or a coffin. His social club sat empty for 3 weeks before someone finally broke the lock and found nothing inside except furniture, and the kind of silence that comes after something violent has finished happening. His crew scattered like roaches when the lights come on, fleeing to Detroit, Chicago, anywhere far enough away that they could pretend they had never heard the name Bumpy Johnson. The families did not ask questions. They did not investigate or demand explanations. Vincent Moretti simply stopped existing in every conversation that mattered, his name erased from the ledgers and the memories of men who understood that some stories were better left unfinished. On a quiet Sunday evening 2 weeks later, Bumpy sat with Mayme in their apartment above Lenox Avenue. No music, no words. She poured him bourbon and he took it, and for a long moment they just sat there in the kind of silence that only comes between people who have survived something together. "Is it finished?" Mayme asked softly. Bumpy looked at her with absolute certainty. "It is finished, and everyone knows why it had to be." They touched glasses without making a toast, the sound of crystal meeting. Crystal, the only acknowledgement needed that some things were worth destroying the world to protect. In the weeks that followed, the unwritten law became scripture in every family from the Bronx to Brooklyn. You could fight over money. You could argue about territory. You could scheme and steal and break every rule if you were smart enough to get away with it. But you did not touch another man's family. You did not humiliate him in front of his people. You did not put your hands on what was sacred. Harlem remained Harlem. Bumpy Johnson remained its king. And Vincent Moretti remained a ghost story that fathers told their sons when they needed to explain the difference between ambition and suicide. This story examines strategic thinking within historical organized crime context for educational purposes only. We don't endorse illegal activity. We study how power operates when conventional rules don't apply. Thank you for staying until the end. If this analysis resonated with you, subscribe for more untold stories where intelligence defeats force.